We are featuring Anna Malaika Tubbs, and we're going to do a quick book talk on her new book, which was released on Tuesday. The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin shaped a nation. And with this book, I would put this book in the same category as something written by Paula Giddings, a female historian that I respect. And the reason why I say that is that this book not only provides an intimate portrait of these three mothers, but you do something that's very groundbreaking by providing the historical context that adds a lot of context to the vicissitudes of their lives and their trajectories. So I definitely appreciate that. So
Thank you.
My first question to you is, of all the iconic leaders that you could have chosen, why did you choose these three men?
Yeah, it was really hard. There are so many options. I knew when I started my PhD, I just wanted to join other scholars who were correcting the erasure of Black women. I was really inspired by Margot Lee Shetterly's Hidden Figures and the impact it had on our reimagining of our history and thinking and questioning why these stories have been kept from us from the very beginning. And so I was excited to become this kind of scholar in my doctoral program. So that left a lot of options open. There are so many stories of ours to uncover and share, but I only had 3 years in my PhD program. I had already done my master's, so it was going to be a shorter program. And so that's when I had the idea to start with famous people and think about the people that were hidden by that fame, by that spotlight. Who was missing from that bright light? Who was in the shadows, kind of waiting to be seen and discovered? And I started looking at a bunch of different famous men in the civil rights movement. And I settled on these three for a couple different reasons. One, because all three of the mothers were born within around 6 years of each other. And all of the sons were born, the famous sons were all born within 5 years of each other. So that also allowed me to then, like you said, go through this really cool historic record and speak to the different ways in which each of their lives was going to be impacted by things like each world war, the Cold War, the Great Depression, the beginnings of the Great Migration, everything that they lived to witness. I could also speak to this, but from the perspective of 3 Black women and 3 Black mothers. So I chose Berdis Baldwin, Alberta King, and Louise Little in the end.
Okay, so, as you probably are aware, today would have been the 26th birthday of Trayvon Martin.
Yes.
And at least 2 of the mothers, MLK's mother and Malcolm X's mother, they both lost children tragically, like Trayvon Martin's mother.
Yes.
What do you think these? What do you think these mothers? What do you think the 3 mothers? What do you think they would say to Trayvon Martin's mom?
Yes, and Miss Fulton has continued to be, I think, an inspiration for many of us in the ways in which she has made this moment so heroically about more than just herself. It's very reminiscent of Mamie Till with her son Emmett, and they're doing so much on our behalf as a nation, as a world, to take from their mourning and say, I'm going to do even more than really should be expected of them. So on one hand, before I speak to what I think the 3 mothers would say to Sabrina Fulton, Miss Fulton, is it's something in the book that I'm trying to address. I don't want us to speak about Black motherhood as if these losses are inevitable, as if this is a burden that Black women should be forced to carry and we should expect to carry it, but instead to think about what we can do to make Black women's lives easier in the United States. In so many ways, we have carried the world on our shoulders. When I speak about these mothers and their desire to transform the system, even after that system has taken their most precious loved ones from them, it's something that we've done for so many years as Black women from our arrival here as slaves, and it should not continue to be expected of us when we're not having the supports that we deserve, when we're not given the backing, when we're not listened to, heard, or believed. So this book is also about changing that. That's really what matters most to me. But I would say that, yes, like you said, in both Alberta and Louise's cases, their sons were assassinated. I will say also that Berdis lived to bury 2 of her sons as well. They didn't pass away violently. They weren't murdered. But at the same time, we can also speak to the effect of James Baldwin developing this cancer after being involved in such a stressful life that dealt with confronting the ills of white supremacy around the world. And I think the three mothers would say we have to continue to push the system to change, that we cannot accept this as our lot. And they did not lose their sons so that we would keep losing our sons, 50, however many years later. So it's just time that more people pay attention to our stories, stop congratulating us for making it through the pain, but instead make our lives less painful by listening to what we need for ourselves and for our communities.
Again, as I praised your work about the historical context, I was so, happy that you had brought up the Patrick Moynihan report in 1965. And Moynihan, blamed, the Black struggle on the, on the matriarchal structure of Black households. And still today, you have neoconservatives and you have, a remnant of Black people that blame all the social ills in the Black community on fatherlessness, single parenthood, and a Black community where a high volume of households are led by women. Would you please speak on that?
Absolutely. And it's something that's happened through so many different decades in history. And in the book, I kind of map out several of the different ways in which Black women have been categorized and blamed for many different things, whether it's the Jezebel trope, whether it's the mammy trope, the matriarch trope, the welfare queen trope, the strong Black woman trope, all of these different things that instead of questioning the ways in which our country and the different racist and sexist systems that have continued to be reproduced year after year are affecting us and breaking our families apart and tearing us down and constantly treating us in these dehumanizing ways, we so often put that burden on Black women and say, this is your fault, you've done this wrong. So it's one of those examples where Black women are expected to do everything. If they don't, they're blamed. Yet they're never thanked for what they do accomplish on behalf of so many. And again, this book is hopefully going to correct that. Hopefully we'll pay more attention to the different policies that have been in place to strategically make it harder for us to live, harder for us to be the human beings who we were born to be. And in these three mothers' cases, I speak about how they manage this balance of being treated as less than human, but knowing that they are more, knowing that they are worth dignity, knowing that that is the case for their own children. And this is the case that I'm making, that their sons were able to learn from their mother's desire for the world to see them as human beings. And that's how they become these revolutionary men who really do transform our world years after their own passing.
Okay. Wow. Awesome. Well, just shifting gears just a little bit, clearly, some of the families were impacted by, generational trauma. That especially figures in the life of Malcolm X. His mother was born to, an 11-year-old mother who was a product, of rape. Earl Little, Malcolm's father himself, a murder victim, had 4 murdered brothers. Would you talk about how generational trauma shaped Malcolm X specifically?
Definitely. Yes, unfortunately. Well, I will say that with the story that we've kind of passed on as historians and scholars around Louise Little being the product of rape comes from Malcolm X at some point saying that he hated the rapist's blood within him. This is actually something that's starting to be questioned now in history, whether he was being hyperbolic and saying because he had light skin and his mother had such light skin, whether she actually was the product of rape, or at some point he's saying that there's quote unquote white rapist blood in him. So to clarify that, some of the family members actually believe that that is not what happened, that she herself was not the product of rape, but it does allow us to speak to that possibility. It was very commonplace, unfortunately, and still is, sexual violence used against Black women as a means of control and as a reaction when they cannot control us or our bodies. So I just want to make sure that that point is out there. But yes, as her life continues and she is this radical activist who believes in Black independence and self-sufficiency, and she joins the Marcus Garvey movement, this puts her and her husband at risk for constant racist attacks and violence from groups like the KKK and another white supremacist group known as the Black Legion. Their homes are burned down. He doesn't suffer, I'm sorry, he was murdered, or Little was shoved under a streetcar. It's then deemed an accident, so Louise Little is not given the life insurance money that she deserves. Then when she's trying to provide for her 7 children at first on her own, and then she has an 8th child after, welfare workers start invading their home. They start telling the children, pulling them aside, saying their mother is quote unquote crazy. And she reads this as a continued racist attack. She tries to challenge that, and then a white male doctor says that she's imagining being discriminated against, and he puts her away for 25 years of her life in a mental institution against her will. So when you're talking about trauma, the trauma just continues and continues and continues. It allows us to better understand the politics with which Malcolm is approaching his work. It's going to be very different than MLK Jr. I don't paint them as polar opposites. I think that's an inaccurate understanding of history. I think they were both approaching, something maybe a little differently, but I wouldn't say that they were polar opposites necessarily. But in this case, when we think about privilege versus generational trauma, MLK Jr. is born to a family that has the privileges of being supported by an entire church, one of the most famous churches in the South. Even then, they believed in meeting each other's needs. They have this social support. They have education. They all go to Spelman and Morehouse. So of course, his understanding is going to be, again, very different than what Malcolm has witnessed. And even when Louise is pregnant with Malcolm, she's literally facing off with a white supremacist mob that comes to her house to intimidate her. So he, of course, is carrying that with him. This book is just as much about generational strength as it is about generational trauma and how we address that, and make sure we pay attention, and rather than just make assumptions as to why Malcolm X believed what he believed and was seen as so quote unquote radical.
And so your book definitely kind of shows us, within these 3 mothers and these 3 iconic figures in history, we definitely see the caste system here. The Kings definitely were at a more socially, and he had more social and economic advantages than Baldwin and Malcolm, and Malcolm X.
Definitely.
And actually the Kings were, the parties definitely flipped, but the Kings were Republicans. They had, conservative values. Do you think if Martin Luther King's mother was alive today, do you think that she would be just like his niece? What is her name? Alberta King?
Ooh, I don't know enough about her.
Do you think MLK's mother would be a Trump supporter?
No, I don't think so at all. Her family really raised her with these values of faith is not faith without social justice. And they believe that all of our basic needs should be met, that, we should even have like a universal income that we should have. So actually, a lot of MLK's sort of socialist leaning policies came from what his maternal grandparents believed in, what they taught their daughter, Alberta, how they led their church. So I would say absolutely not. Like you said, the parties did flip. They were some of the first members of the NAACP. And at the time, the NAACP versus like Marcus Garvey, they're going to be more conservative. They're going to be the ones that are saying, we need to uplift our race. They're going to have more of these respectability politics at play and how they approach, how we all need to act as a race in order for people to maybe accept us. So that was maybe much more of their mentality. But I definitely wouldn't go so far as to say she would be a Trump supporter.
Okay. And talking about the women. You talk about the women's suffrage movement, and you kind of expose some of the racism within the white feminist movement. And
yeah,
so
definitely.
Could you talk about that and talk about some of the you use that to lead in to talk about some of the nuances of Black motherhood?
Yeah, and throughout the book, I start almost every chapter except for the final 2 with two quotes. One is a humanizing quote that is by a Black person, saying, I am a human being, I'm fighting for my rights, I believe in Black freedom in many different ways and colors and forms. And then the second quote is always a dehumanizing quote, many of them spoken by white women, saying, this is what we believe about Black women, that they are kind of immoral beings, that all of the problems with their race should be blamed on them, that they're promiscuous, that they give birth to undesirables, with Margaret Sanger, etc. So many of these, that's the kind of balance I'm trying to reach with both of those quotes that situate the time, because each chapter addresses a different decade in the women's lives. So yes, it was very commonplace, and one of the biggest players in keeping Black people oppressed were white women. And we continue to see that today, unfortunately. One of the things I'm trying to do is make connections to where we are as a country today. If we look at the numbers and who votes for Trump versus who votes for the other candidate on the slate, white women continue almost majorly. I think this year it might have been like 54% to 46%, but that is still a huge number of white women who say Trump should have been our president. No matter what he's done to hurt all of us as a country, we have white women, and this example of them wanting to more so align with white supremacy than with what would be best for them or for their fellow women. And there are remnants of this throughout American history that I really map throughout the book. And it's something we have to pay attention to. So many are, again, when we talk about voting, they say, oh, we need more communities of color to vote. We need more people to get out there and vote. 100%, we do need to fix voter suppression. That's what we should be saying. But we also need to be addressing white women who continue to vote against their own interests in the spirit of upholding white supremacist policies.
So definitely the whole Karen trope did not start in the last couple of years.
Definitely not. No, there is evidence of that from the very beginning.
And you identify some Karens in the 1940s or 1950s?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I'd have to go back through the book and see which quotes I used for those particular chapters.
Would Elizabeth Cady Stanton be considered?
There we go. Yeah, and that's who I quoted. I think I should.
Yeah, and here's a quote that I'd like to read here. This is a quote that she said in relation to men and marriage. Your chapter on men and marriage. This is the quote that you put in about her. She said, "Why should the African prove more just and generous than his Saxon compeers? If the 2 million of Southern Black women are not to be secured in their rights of person, property, wages, and children, their emancipation is but another form of slavery. In fact, it is better to be a slave of an educated white man than of a degraded, ignorant Black one."
There it is. There she is, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And I mean, a lot of these women, if you go further into understanding a lot of the ones that I choose for these quotes, why they said what they said, they all talk about the fact that their fathers suffered when Black people gained more rights in their country. So even going back to the very first chapter, I use a quote from an anonymous Southern woman. She didn't say her name, but she talks about the fact that her father suffered from, this Reconstruction period. Her father suffered when Black people gained more rights, and therefore he joins the KKK to put Black people back in their place. And she knows, even when she's a kid and she's playing with the Black girls on her plantation, that she knows that she's naturally better than them. And this is this mentality that Alberta, Berdis, and Louise had to confront as young girls, no matter where they were from, how different they were, their different access to different resources, like we spoke about earlier. This was the general understanding of how people felt simply because they were Black girls. And it carries forward with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It's very similar, her background, to this first quote that I just mentioned. She says, my family suffered so much so that they could no longer pay out of pocket for her tuition, I think is the exact example that she uses. And therefore, she chooses, again, to align herself with white supremacy, to forward the white suffragist movement and the passing of the 19th Amendment.
Wow. And going on, again, talking about, racism within, the white feminist female, community, I want to also read another quote that you quoted Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned
Planned Parenthood.
Parenthood. And this is what she had to say about the birth of Black children. She said, on its negative side, it shows us that we are paying for and even submitting to the dictates of an ever increasing, unceasingly spawning class of human beings who never should have been born at all. And so if you oblige me for a moment, I just want to put on a neoconservative lens. Conservatives, often, justify their conservatism by saying that, the whole women's reproductive rights movement and Planned Parenthood, that they are against it because it was started by Margaret Sanger, who her whole impetus was genocide, to exterminate the Black population. So do you think that movement, do you think that it is an attempt to obliterate Black motherhood?
That is a hard question. I'll answer it, but I also should say that with Margaret Sanger, if you kind of map her desire to introduce birth control into the United States, at first she says it as this call to like freedom for white women from the domestic sphere. And all of these men at the time say, no, we need white women to continue to reproduce. We cannot commit what they called race suicide. Presidents were using these terms because white women were starting to have less children. They wanted to go to work. They felt that they could gain freedoms by being part of the public sphere. And so when she first kind of asks for this, and other advocates that are working alongside her, no one supports this because they cannot get behind the idea that white women should curtail or have a choice as to whether or not they're going to become mothers. And then a couple years later, this is when she starts to kind of change the messaging because more people could get behind the notion of controlling women of color and their reproduction. That made sense to these men that were in power. And therefore, she pushes that message even further, maybe even more than she herself believed. But these are direct quotes. These are things that she said. And this is how the birth control pill becomes available, is because of this argument that if we could curtail the birth, and not only of Black people, this was quote unquote like all undesirables. They were speaking about people who had disabilities. They were speaking about Native Americans. When we go back and look at forced sterilization in the United States, it's not only Black women who have suffered from this. There are so many others. Thousands and thousands of Puerto Rican women were sterilized against their will. So it's also to pay attention and make sure that we understand that history as well, how it's intertwined with anyone who they viewed as being unworthy of reproducing. So I will say, obviously, there were several benefits to giving women the choice as to whether or not they should have children or whenever they wanted to have children. Again, maybe she was able to accomplish what her original goal was while putting it on this very racist agenda, but it's definitely a history that we have to recognize. And even today, Black feminist scholars and activists are calling for reproductive justice choice. It still is the case, and you can read about this in Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body.
Wow.
She talks about how even today, I mean, this book is like now a couple years old, but it still is very relevant, that these birth control methods are pushed on Black families much more often than they are on white families. And even in my own experience, when I went into the hospital, I think oftentimes people think I'm a little younger than I am. I am young, I'm 28 years old, but people think I'm even younger because how high pitched my voice is. And so when I went into the hospital, ready to talk about my child, and I was pregnant and so excited, I could feel this initial sort of judgment. How old are you? When are you going to start getting on birth control? When, when your child's born, how soon are you going to, like, these questions that I could feel are probably not asked of everybody. But there was a clear sense of when, as a Black woman, I should or should not have a child. So many Black women can speak to that. And it is really unfortunate. And it's something that Berdis, Alberta, and Louise also had to deal with and confront.
Wow. So would you just briefly compare and just kind of contrast the three mothers for us?
Definitely. I can kind of give little teasers to introduce them.
Yes, yes.
So Alberta King, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but she was born to two parents that led Ebenezer Baptist Church to what we see it as today, this beacon of hope in civil rights and making sure that we speak about Black freedom. And even, Reverend Warnock, who is now our senator, was the Reverend at Ebenezer Baptist. Is this beautiful history that Alberta's parents, they didn't found the church when they arrived. I think there were about 14 members of the church, but they grew it to be this kind of huge influence that it continues to be today. So this is where Alberta King is born, not in the church, but she, is raised in the church. She's the daughter of Ebenezer Baptist. She's this talented musician. She wants to become a teacher. She goes on to get her college degree and her teaching certificate. But when she meets her husband at the time, there was a law in place that said that married women could not work in certain jobs. And one of those jobs was teaching. So by law, she's kept from her career when she chooses to marry. So instead, she uses her talents and her skills to educate her husband, who, when she meets him, is considered illiterate. She helps him get into Morehouse because her family, all of them go to Morehouse and they all go to Spelman. So her legacy is crucial, again, to understanding MLK Jr. They could not have had any of these privileges. Even her husband says this in his autobiography. His autobiography is a love letter to his wife. When he meets her, he says, I was just a green country boy. And, I was able to get her to fall in love with me. But she says to me, you're not educated and you need to be.
Wow.
So she goes to her father and says, can we get Morehouse? And so she tutors him through his degree. Like, he went from being illiterate to getting a college degree. And he's married to a teacher. So I'm pretty sure she maybe did some of those assignments for him. But this is who raises MLK Jr. And she's well aware of the need to make sure that we're speaking for our people in our community. So I'll say that about Alberta King. Louise Little was born in Grenada. So she immigrates to the United States. Well, first she goes to Montreal, Canada to join the Marcus Garvey movement. Her uncle was living there. She falls in love with this whole Black independence, Black pride, this kind of non-assimilation movement that we were going to be who we were, loud and proud, do whatever it took to gain our freedoms. And her husband meet at a Marcus Garvey movement meeting, and then they move around the country spreading the message of Garveyism. This is why they become targets of all these white supremacist groups, because everywhere they go, they're called uppity. They are told that they're disrupting the good Negroes of the community. And that's what they were known for. And very unafraid, very brave, very courageous. And that's what they raised their children to be as well. And then thirdly, Berdis Baldwin, she was born in Deal Island, Maryland, a tiny, tiny town that, when you talk about historic context, it took me a lot of effort to find anything about this tiny place. But Maryland, as we know, has such a history of leaders and Black freedom movers. Harriet Tubman is from Maryland. We have so many others, Frederick Douglass, Thurgood Marshall, the list goes on and on and on. That state has so many. And Berdis Baldwin is one of those many that we just didn't know before this book. But she, when she was born, she lost her mom very young. I actually think that her mother passed away in childbirth based off of what I was able to find in her death certificate. She passed away from hemorrhaging the same month that Berdis was born. And from this tragedy, she believes in hope and love and light and the need to have forgiveness and never carry pain, that you should confront the darkness, confront the pain, but find the light, because that's how you could move forward and cope. And she leaves Deal Island when she's a teenager. She goes on her own, first to Philadelphia, then to New York. She's one of the great migrants. And she arrives in New York during the Harlem Renaissance, and she's this brilliant writer. So everybody who knows her path and her journey says she's this brilliant mind. She writes these letters that just inspire you. Even the principals at James's schools talk about how her letters to excuse his absences were so beautifully written that he must have inherited his writing from her directly. I don't even know how you make an absence letter beautiful, but they must have been amazing to make it of note. And but unfortunately, she has to provide first for her son as a single parent. She has James Baldwin, not with David Baldwin, but with somebody else that she never really identified. She didn't want people to know much about that story. She doesn't even really tell James the story. And then she meets David Baldwin, James Baldwin's stepfather. If you're a fan of James Baldwin, you've probably heard of his abusive stepfather. He was very abusive towards his wife as well. And I'll leave it there. She's, again, though, finds this way to still teach her children how to love and how to think about darkness in a way that eventually can lead to hope.
Would you, speaking about Baldwin, would you talk about his mother in relation to how his relationship with his mother may have, I may not be phrasing this right, but how, talk about her and his identity as a queer gay man, in a time in history to where it was not socially, culturally acceptable.
Yeah. It's interesting because so James Baldwin and Berdis Baldwin were so close, their lives so intertwined. He loved and admired his mother so much that even when he passed away, so just to give context, she has 9 children in her life, 9. He was her first. When he passed away, and he was the first of her children to pass away, and his last wish is that there's a double plot set aside so that when Berdis dies, she'll join him and be buried next to him. So even if you go to visit James Baldwin's grave, he's buried right next to his mother. So she has 8 other children, but that's where she is with her son, her firstborn. So it's almost like he wanted the world to know. He knew he was a man of influence. If you're going to come and visit my grave, you're going to know my life and my mother's life are one. They're interconnected. But I didn't find anything in the record that, a letter back and forth from them, or even in the biography written about him by David Leeming, he's one of James Baldwin's best friends, that she said anything about his sexuality. But she was definitely aware of it because he didn't hide it. He introduced everybody who mattered to him to his mother. He wrote her letters constantly. The only concern she ever had for him, or that she judged him for, was the fact that he drank and smoked too much. And she felt that he cussed a little too much. But outside of that, had she had any ill feelings about it, that would have come up in the record. And I kind of read that as her being ahead of her time and just going back to this notion of love no matter what. And she really embraces all of her children and pushes them to follow their creative paths that they've really inherited from her own passions, that she just accepted him. And she met some of his lovers as well in New York. They all came to her house in Harlem. James Baldwin wanted them to meet his mother. And there's no record that she had anything to say about it, which is really, honestly, modern kind of queer theory, that we shouldn't make such a big deal or have to have this moment of coming out if you're queer. Like, it's not like a straight person has to say, hello, look at my sexuality. So maybe in just many ways, she was ahead of her time.
It's interesting too when you look at Baldwin and you look at a few years ago, the what is it, the film, is it the new Negro, not the new Negro,
I Am Not Your Negro.
I Am Not Your Negro. It just seems like with the millennial and younger generation, it seems like they identify more with Baldwin than King and Malcolm X. It seems like Baldwin's message seems to be more palatable, and it seems like he has kind of stood the
it's breaking.
The test of time. I think our speaker we've lost her for a moment. Just a moment, everybody. I think our speaker we're having.
I'm back. Okay, my Wi-Fi went out for a second, I think, but I'm back. Let me know if it happens again. Can you say the question one more time?
Yeah, it seems like the millennial and the younger generation, it seems like they relate more to James Baldwin than MLK or Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Why do you think Baldwin his message seems to be more palatable than the other 2 leaders?
I honestly think it's more so that James Baldwin is making a little bit of a comeback recent years, because at the time when the 3 of them are alive, Malcolm X and MLK Jr. and maybe a little bit Medgar Evers are who a lot of people are focused on. And James Baldwin sort of says about himself that he's a witness to the movement. He's a writer. He's kind of viewed a little differently, even though he himself participated in marches and also put his body on the line, but people knew him more as this writer. And so I think part of it was he wasn't as famous as the other two back then. And even now, when I say even that I've been doing my book, and this is what I write about, and my PhD is at the University of Cambridge in England, so I also have this kind of international perspective on this. A lot of people still don't know who James Baldwin is. So I do find that to be interesting. For those of us that love Baldwin, you're sort of like, how could you not know who Baldwin is? But if we did kind of like an overall around the country and world kind of survey, many would still actually not know how impactful his work was. I think merely recently in our country, we're starting to pay more attention to him with I Am Not Your Negro, the documentary that came out, as well as If Beale Street Could Talk, Barry Jenkins adapting that for film. So more people are returning to learn more about Baldwin. And I think that's why many of us, maybe who are younger, feel like we can relate because we think that he was and always has been maybe just as famous. But I receive that question all the time. Why did you add Baldwin as the third? Like, it's so obvious with MLK and Malcolm X, but why Baldwin? And I always saw them as a natural three, but not everybody does. So that's my opinion. And then I would also add that he has a balance of this righteous anger, very similar to Malcolm X, but also then ends up with this light and this hope of MLK Jr. I think it's this honest confrontation of the darkness where he really directly addresses that, but then somehow finds a way for you to still feel some levity and some hope for where we're moving next. At least that's how I feel when I read a lot of Baldwin's works.
So tell me, if you're able to spend an entire day with one of the three mothers, who would you choose and why?
Oh, I love them all three equally. I'm this weird fan that just like loves the three women so deeply. Gosh, I really couldn't choose. I want to know something about every single one of them. And really, if I could spend time with them, I just wish I could know more about how they felt about things personally. I wish I could have read more from their own perspective. You know, if they'd kept diaries that were public, their families might have access to these, but that's not something that I was able to gain access to. Their own opinions on what happened and what they were seeing and witnessing. You know, even when I think about Louise Little being put away for 25 years of her life against her will, and the record of her time there, all we have are letters that the doctors sent back and forth to each other, white doctors, many of them male. And yes, Malcolm X's mother, I see that chat, Louise Little. And I want to know from her perspective, what was happening? How did she feel?
Wow.
What did they feel like? You know, I mean, obviously we can imagine, or maybe we can't imagine the amount of pain when their sons die, their children, their babies. We don't get to hear it from their perspective. We really mainly get to hear it from family members' perspective. So for instance, with Alberta, her husband says she was so incredibly strong in that moment. She was taking care of her grandchildren. But I'm thinking there's more to it. You know, it's not just because so often, even today, people will look at Black women and say, oh, they're being so strong. Wow. And I think if we ask that mom how she's really feeling, we would have a much deeper understanding of the complexity of the emotion.
Okay. Well, I want to make this conversation a little bit more interactive. So we have someone from the audience that wants to ask you a question.
Awesome.
So I'm going to invite Miss Pamela to come on and ask her to start her video here. Okay, there she is. Let's see here. Okay, you got to wait. You're still muted. Okay, there you go.
Here I am.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, Pamela?
Great. Such a great opportunity to listen to you talk about your book.
Thank you for joining.
Sure. I'm going to go to my chat because I'm on my cell phone. So
Okay.
I don't know if I'll drop off or not.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I mean, even my Wi-Fi is not super reliable, it seems.
Okay, let's see. My question is, do you think white women have unconscious bias against Black women? Or do you think they are aware of their white supremacist tendencies? Do you think that white women's education levels play a part in this?
Mm.
I do not think white women as a whole group are intentionally racist, but I do see racism in society today as something resulting from family or ancestral influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it's, I try my best not to categorize groups of people altogether. I think that it is circumstance by circumstance. I think some white women are very aware that they have bias against Black people. I think others really are not aware that the way that they're voting or the things that they support are literally taking away lives from Black communities or hurting Black community members. I would say that many Trump supporters and white women who voted for Trump probably didn't think about how it was personally affecting so many others. And that's not only communities of color, but poor white women as well. They voted against their own selves. So I think some of it is unconscious and some of it is conscious, but there is hope in the fact that all of those things can change. I myself, my mom is a white woman, and she is one of the most politically active, one of the biggest allies, perhaps because she is the mother of Black children. But I would say even before she had us and even before she met our father, she was well aware of the history that she was carrying. In my own blood, I have both slave ancestry and slave owner ancestry. And my mom was aware of that. And it's something that she addressed even within her own family. Like you're saying, these kind of generational familial things that are taught to us. And we do have to address that. But I think we are starting to see a shift for many white women who are also starting to stand up for themselves. A big part of supporting their fellow women is thinking how their own rights are being taken from them when they're kind of tricked to align themselves with white supremacy. I don't remember the name of this article, but there was an article about how white women joined the KKK in droves because they were promised certain rights and then they were never given those rights. So I think that the trick hopefully is up, and more white women who do have these white supremacist mentalities, whether conscious or unconscious, are starting to question why they themselves have been taught that it's going to be best for them when in fact it's worse.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for our author?
Yes.
Okay. Is that Linda?
This is Lisa.
Okay. All right, Lisa, you're on. Let me find you.
It says L. I was rushing trying to get on.
I love it. Very
Okay.
mysterious.
Well, we want to see you, I guess, because we're trying to be interactive here. There we go. There's Miss Lisa.
Hello.
All right, Miss
Hi.
Lisa, you have the floor.
Oh my gosh, it's I want to say it's an honor and privilege, just to be around, just this whole, in spite of the virus, and but this is something great and encouraging, for me as a woman of color, a
Yes.
single mother, so I appreciate listening to stuff like this,
Wow.
One of the things I guess I want to get your advice on, one of the things that really touched me in this conversation was with the birth control, the vaccines, just certain things that has been, I guess, traumatized to us, some of women of color, and I'm around your age as well. And I feel like in society, when I go and navigate through society, it's like certain things, gets frowned upon. Like when I say I don't want the flu shot, when I talk about the MMR shot, with kids with autism, just certain things that I'm learning, it's like I'm aware of now, and I get looked, down on. But I want to ask you, like, what advice could you give me? Because I want to, spread, like, some of this information you were giving was so, like, it was really, like I can go through life knowing, and, feeling hopeful.
Oh, thank you.
So I guess my advice to you is, like, how do we reach out to those in our generation, and let them know certain things,
Yeah. Well, I would say I do talk about this in the book, why as Black community members and other groups would feel lack of trust in our medical system, because in many ways it was built on experimenting on our bodies. We know about the Tuskegee experiment. We know about all these things that were used the medical field against us. And so to acknowledge why that mistrust is happening, I definitely think is an important part of what policymakers need to do, especially with the COVID-19 vaccine. They're not understanding why so many would say, I don't want this, I'm not ready, or I don't believe you're, these are real fears. But at the same time, we also cannot keep what has happened to us in the past and these attacks on us in the past keep us from being able to live in our future. Unfortunately, something like COVID-19 is affecting our community so severely. So many of the deaths are our people, that we are going to need to take this vaccine, but we also need to be educated, like you said, on the options. We want to feel like we're being spoken to with transparency. And I think, unfortunately, in the United States, so much has to do with this kind of historical amnesia of forgetting what has happened to people of color and then expecting us to forget it too. But we're not forgetting it. And therefore, we want to approach the future with trust and with this belief in our dignity and our worth, where people are respecting that we're intelligent beings who are making decisions based off of what's happened to us historically. So I want more people to acknowledge that, rather than be like, oh, these dumb people that aren't taking the vaccine. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with very real histories of being betrayed and mistrust. But I also want us as a people to be educated on what we need to do to survive in this nation. And if we're not taking the vaccine, we're going to keep losing our people. So even when I think about, with birth control, or like having what I needed as a Black woman, knowing that I was going to go into labor, would probably have, a white doctor or somebody meeting me on the day of that wasn't my primary physician, because that's just how so much of it works. I had doulas right next to me. I had 3 women of color who were my advocates in the hospital. And I think as much as we can find advocates in each other and find trust in each other, the primary vaccine was developed by a Black woman. That's where we can find more hope. There's many of us who can help each other. We all have expertise in different things, whether we have degrees or not. We're all experts in something. And I think sharing that knowledge and finding that trust within our own people could help to alleviate some of our fear. That's very valid.
Yes, I thank you, and I appreciate that. I had one more question. I was thinking about it, and because I'm in the education field now, this is going left. What advice would you give me as a teacher? Working with white women, Caucasian women who are teaching our kids, and I'm a teacher's aide, and I seen something that was going on in a school. And so how do you navigate through that, like the whole school system and teaching our kids and, just certain things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I taught for several years as well. That was difficult for me as well. I mean, I was also a college counselor, and at times disagreed a little bit with different approaches that different schools had to advising students of color very specifically. I think as much as we can in our own classrooms, when we're present, it's really important that we do our part and make sure we're teaching as much as we can our histories and kind of find that bravery, because on the other side is that strategy of controlling our minds, et cetera. I really believe that those things can be very real. That's not to say that white teachers cannot be advocates for their students of color, and they're going to need to be, and many of them are. But unfortunately, there's still many who do not see us fully as our human selves, and with the dignity that we deserve. And I definitely witnessed that multiple times in my own experience with education. And then even for parents who aren't themselves teachers, or even community members who don't have their own children but want to help with this, something that Louise Little did, actually, Malcolm X's mother, every time her kids came back from school, she would have them sit down, read 3 different newspapers from, the different kind of perspectives. They would read it out loud to her. They would tell her what they'd learned that day in school, and she would reteach them anything she felt needed to be retaught. It's something we need to be aware of for all of our children. What are they being taught? Let's keep track of that as much as possible. What are some things that we feel need to be changed so that we can pay attention to what's going in and out of their ears when they're not right beside us. And also when we're in educational experiences and buildings and we have these positions of influence, how brave can we be with what we want to teach our students?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Miss Linda. So Ms. Tubbs, I think we're getting ready to bring our discussion to a close. Would you share with us just briefly? Let's look at all three of the mothers.
Yeah.
Share with us just one pearl of wisdom that you got from each of the three mothers that has stood the test of time.
Yeah, and I think that I have dozens, honestly, that I've gained from all three of them. And obviously, I've read the book several times with the different drafts. And so every time I read it, I gain something new that I didn't even realize that they're teaching me. So their lives, just like their sons, are really everlasting in the ways that they continue to give us new air to breathe. And I hope that this book allows people to, reread it again and again and think through the different lessons that they're trying to teach us that even I haven't seen yet in my latest reading. But what stands out the most to me right now, or even in my most recent read with Berdis, it always is that love, but that honesty. Like, it's not find the light no matter what, always be optimistic, but it's see the pain, see the darkness, understand what's happening, and find hope and find a way forward and be a part of that. I think she really taught James that he could help other people see things differently through his writing. And he could help them not only to hope, but he could help them see how they played a part in making the world more hopeful. So that's my kind of gem from Berdis. With Alberta King, I think for her, it's the fact that she used her privileges to inspire people around her as this humble community leader. She never saw herself as above other people, from my understanding, but instead thought, okay, I have access to things that a lot of other people do not. How do I share that? How do I bring people with me? How do I make sure I'm not the only person who is going to gain something from this opportunity? And with Louise Little, for her, it's this confrontation with fear, but how you still use that fear to motivate. It's something Audre Lorde talked about a lot, actually, that you can be afraid. If you stand up for these things, it's going to be fearful at times. But whether or not you're afraid, and I'm paraphrasing, they're still attacking us. Yes. Right? So if you're just going to sit and be afraid, you're still going to be attacked. But if you're going to be afraid and act, maybe there's something you can do to change it again. So I really believe all three of these sons were change makers because their mothers taught them to be, and in different ways, they taught them to confront what was really happening, but never let that stop you from being an agent of change who would make the world a different place than it was when they themselves were born.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you live and this is just for Delaware residents only, if you live in the state of Delaware, feel free to Facebook message us if you'd like a copy of the book, and you can either pick it up at the library or mail it to your home. And next week, we will be having a conversation with Ida B. Wells' great granddaughter, who has written the book Ida B. the Queen. So we're looking forward to that next week, and then the following week we will have the iconic Lynn Whitfield joining us. So
That's so cool.
We have a very robust Black History Month program lineup in store. Anna Malaika Tubbs, thank you so much. It has been an honor. Best wishes with you. Thank you.
Thank you
for your work. And again, her book is the three mothers. And if you live in the state of Delaware, we have a copy of the book for you if you wish to have a copy. So thank you very much. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.